How's it going, guys? It's Kass. As always, if you've been enjoying my content, then hit that subscribe button. So in today's video, we're going to go through the new baseline changes for Demon Hunter PvP and talk about some of the new PvP talents coming to Demon Hunter patch 9.1. So I have made some in-depth videos on some of these PvP talents already. So for those talents, I'm just going to skip over them and just talk about them briefly. If you want more information about those specifically, there'll be a link in the description below. Now, going into these, we have some very interesting changes to Demon Hunter baseline, along with the new PvP talents that we've gotten. So we're just going to go ahead and start from the top of the list and slowly work our way down. The first thing that we're going to talk about is Blood Moon, which is a new PvP talent. I've already made a video on this going in depth. However, this talent is still bugged. It does not give you the leech that you're supposed to. So I'm still not 100% sure how good it's actually going to be. But realistically, this is probably only going to see playability in some niche 2v2 situations when you don't have a healer. Overall, this is a pretty weird talent in general. It forces you to press your dispel off cooldown in order to gain access to leech, which realistically doesn't make that much sense. Next is a new talent that is Chaotic Imprints. This sounds very interesting. It makes it so Throglaive deals a random damage from a random school of magic. And then on top of that, whatever school of magic you do, it increases the target's damage taken from that school by 10% for 20 seconds. This is very strong with Demon Hunter's chaos damage, because chaos damage is technically every type of magic damage that is available to us. So every time that we press this, we get 10% increased damage to our chaos damage. On top of that, it chooses between frost, fire, nature, and arcane damage. So if you think about a class like Boomkin that has nature and arcane damage, they get around 50% benefit from this as well. So if you're using a talent like Master Glaive, it allows you to cycle through the different damage buffs a lot, and it basically will give you a lot of situations where you can set up kills with 10% increased damage with this talent. This talent is very strong in those specific matchups where you have access to a partner that can also benefit from it. Next is Glimpse. This is a talent that probably won't see any play. It makes it so Vengeful Retreat gives you immunity to loss of control effects, and it reduces your damage taken by 75% until you land. It's important to point out with this that you cannot press it in CC. If you can press this preemptively before one of those comes out, you can basically negate that control effect. The reduced damage reduction portion of this is really not that great. It's only about 2 seconds of actual damage reduction, and realistically, unless you pair it with Rain from Above, you can't really get more than like 3 seconds or 4 seconds at max. If you do decide to use Rain from Above and this talent together, you get around 8 seconds of 75% reduced damage taken. However, that majority of that portion is going to be when you're in the air anyway. Realistically, it's probably not going to change that much. Moving on from that, we have Isolated Prey. This is a brand new talent that was added this week. It makes it so whenever Chaos Nova, I-Beam, and Fell Rush hit one target, you get a specific bonus for them. So Chaos Nova, whenever you hit one target, increases the stun duration by 1 second, which is pretty nice. I-Beam increases the target's damage taken by 10% for 6 seconds whenever you hit one target. It's important to point out with this one that it's based off of the ticks of damage of I-Beam. So the first tick of damage that you do with I-Beam applies this buff, and every subsequent tick after that reapplies the buff. So for the whole channel of the I-Beam, you have 10% increased damage, but it doesn't actually start the countdown of the 6 seconds until the 10% or until the I-Beam is finished. So in situations where you're using Blinding Fury, you have around 8 seconds of 10% increased damage. Then we have the Fell Rush modifier for this. If you hit one target with Fell Rush, you generate 35 to 45 Fury. So on average, you get 40 Fury, which is basically a free Chaos Strike. Overall, obviously, the I-Beam portion of this is extremely strong. Adding in the other two modifiers just makes this talent very, very good in situations where you're going to only be hitting one target for the majority of the time. Next, we're going to look at the baseline changes and the changes to the current PvP talents that are already in the game. The first baseline change is a change to Imprison. It now lasts 4 seconds instead of 3 seconds, so it has a 1 second increase in the amounts of time spent in the sap. Next, we have detainments. Since imprison got changed, detainment is also getting changed. It increases the duration of imprison by 1 second from 2, so it still has the exact same duration, but now it no longer has an increased cooldown. So this makes it so the target that you press on it cannot be healed during those situations, and it has the exact same cooldown of prison. So this will see a lot of play in situations where you need the extra form of CC. Moving on from detainment, we're going to talk about an incredible change, and one of these changes that honestly will probably become one of the best PvP talents for Demon. Unending Hatred now generates fury from all damage sources, and its fury generation has been increased by 50%. So before, it only generated fury from magic damage. What this does now is it allows you to get obviously more fury since it has increased generation, and it allows you to get that fury from any class that is hitting you. This will basically mean that in situations where you're being trained, you have access to a lot more fury than you would normally, basically allowing you to have a lot more uptime on your leech and generally making the class tankier overall, if you're obviously playing soul rending. On top of that, it also allows for situations where you get stunned. Every time you come out of that stun, you're going to have basically a full fury bar. So if you got stunned in a situation where you had no fury, in order to actually counter pressure after coming out of that stun, you still had to press your generators before being able to press things like I-beam and getting access to Chaos Strike and things like that. Whereas now, once you get out of the stun, you can automatically go towards counter pressuring. You can automatically have fury for stuns. Overall, this is a very strong change, and in situations where you're being trained, this is probably one of the best PvP talents you could use. On top of that, this is also a talent that Vengeance gets, and for Vengeance, this talent is probably just the best talent they have access to. This talent was strong before for Vengeance, and one that I used prior, and it just makes it significantly better now. Now we're going to talk about some interesting changes that will have some implications to how the class will survive overall. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the change to Cover of Darkness. Cover of Darkness before was our best defensive PvP talent by far, and realistically used by almost every Demon Hunter. It made it so your darkness granted extra 50% chance to avoid damage in PvP. It obviously added to the 20% baseline, so it basically gave us 70% chance to avoid damage whenever standing in darkness. That has been changed and removed. It's now been redesigned to make it so the radius of darkness is increased by 4 yards, and its duration is increased by 2 seconds. Overall, this talent probably will see zero play whatsoever. I think this talent is actually very bad. The only good portion of this talent is the duration increase. However, when we actually talk about the darkness change, 2 seconds of increased duration with darkness just isn't that good. The radius of darkness being increased makes almost no sense, just because in all of these situations, you're most likely the one getting trained whenever you're playing Cover of Darkness anyway. So having a 4-yard radius doesn't really do anything. On top of that, in those situations as well, when they're hitting a different target and you're pressing darkness on them to save them, you're always able to get within enough of a radius to press darkness on them. Just overall, this talent is just bad, and I don't really think anyone's going to use it. Since we just talked about Cover of Darkness, let's talk about the darkness change. Now, this is a very positive change for the class, but it does lead to some losses in our survivability, unfortunately. So darkness now grants 50% chance to avoid all damage in PvP combat. That was increased from 20%. However, like I said before, since we were almost always taking Cover of Darkness, this is technically still 20% less than what we have currently whenever we press darkness in tandem with that talent. However, I don't think that's necessarily that much of a bad thing, because realistically the difference between 50% chance to avoid all damage and 70% chance to avoid all damage isn't that drastic. There will be some situations where you die because of this change that you wouldn't have died prior, but the likelihood that it really changes the outcomes in those situations is pretty low. If anything, this change basically means that you have to take Nether Walk which honestly, given how bad our leech has been in the current situation, I think that just makes sense, especially in 3v3. Basically, in the situations that you were pressing darkness to potentially save your life versus goes, you're just going to have another luck for those situations as well. This has moved darkness just to being a better ability overall, just baseline, and not forcing you to play a talent to make it even worth it. Next, we're going to talk about demonic origins. They reduce the duration of metamorphosis by 10 seconds instead of 15. So now we have 20 seconds of metamorphosis every 2 minutes with this talent instead of only 15. This is a very strong change. It allows you to line up your cooldown of metamorphosis a lot better with the cooldowns of the majority of arena partners that you'll have in 3v3. So overall, this is a very good change for Demon Hunter in 3v3 environments. Lastly, we're going to talk about a fix to a bug that is kind of ridiculous that it's taken this long. So Blur is now correctly granting 50% dodge while active in PvP combat, and then it says was granting a reduced value. So I guess Blur was just bugged for this whole season and Blizzard didn't change it or hotfix it at all, which is pretty bizarre given the performance of the class. I'm really hoping that this granted a reduced value wasn't 49% dodge to 50% dodge, and that this will make Blur feel pretty good again. But we will have to see once this change comes through just how good Blur feels. This could be a very, very strong change to Blur, or it could be a very minimal change to Blur. Either way, it's going to be an increase in our damage reduction, which is nice. Then to make way for the new PvP talents that we have added, they removed some of our least used PvP talents, and honestly, these changes don't really change that much unless we get back to situations where there's dampening. Then the removal of mana break kind of sucks, but overall these changes really won't impact the game in its current state. With that said, these changes I believe are very positive for the class. I think overall they've pushed Demon Hunter in a much better position to begin with, and realistically, although we're losing some of the defensiveness of darkness, hopefully with the changes that we've had so far, and then the increase in gearing and versatility will lead to more general survivability for Demon Hunter. Overall, our damage is very good in PvP right now. I've tested it with a few skirmishes and feel very, very strong. I think Demon Hunter is going to be in a good spot for PvP. Are they going to be the best melee class? No. Are you going to be able to play 2v2 without a healer? Probably not, especially if you're not playing with another hybrid class. But overall, I think Demon Hunter is going to be in a much more positive spot coming in patch 9.1, which is great to hear. As always, if you enjoyed this video, then hit that like button. And if you didn't like the video, F5 refresh, try it again. Maybe you'll like it the second time. Have a good one.